Hello again. I'm Chris Lee of Southeastern 14 with our off-season series on SEC football, welcoming Nick Della Torre to the show today. Nick has covered Florida for quite a while. He works at Gators Online. Maybe we'd rather be talking baseball, but we're talking football today. Thanks for joining us, Nick.
Yeah. Since we're talking football, I'm wearing my SEC hat, which has 14 banners. We both might be a little outdated since we're talking football, and we've got this next season coming up with Texas and Oklahoma joining.
Yeah, I hear this may be a problem for companies who built their brand
For some
around
branding.
a number. But that's another story. Before we get to Florida football, reminder, our content brought to you by Bet Online, which continues to be your number one source for all your basketball wagering needs, including pro and college hoops throughout the year. With up-to-the-minute odds, stats, and trends, you can follow your favorite team's path to the playoffs with live in-game betting, contests, and all the best player props. Experience the world's best wagering platform anytime from your desktop or mobile devices. Head to BetOnline today. Become part of the team. Remember to use your promo code BELIEVE for your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. BetOnline, the game starts here. Nick, let's back up a little bit. I thought that when Florida hired Billy Napier, great hire, seemed to hit a lot of areas where Florida, I guess you would say, needed some improvement in terms of discipline and image and a lot of stuff. I think everybody was on board with the hire, felt like to me. I have a source in the league who's pretty spot on most stuff. And he told me, I'm guessing this has been the 1st of November of 2022. The storyline that everybody's talking about behind the scenes is Florida. They think that's the next one that everybody's scared of more than anybody. That is decidedly not the narrative as we do this the last day of February, or I guess the next to last day since we're in a leap year of 2024 as we sit here. What happened between there and here?
I think the Cliff Notes version of it can be boiled down to just 2 games. I thought in Billy Napier's first year, if you want to talk about it in terms of going on a hike, it starts off great. Sun is shining. It's 70 degrees, beautiful weather. You beat Utah. You've got all kinds of energy. Throughout the hike, it gets a little bit hotter. You get tired. Maybe you trip a little bit. You lose some games. You get beat by Georgia pretty bad. But you get back down. You're happy you did it. It was a good first hike. You get down to your car, and as you're reaching for your keys, a skunk sprays you. And now you're sitting in the car smelling like that the whole way home. And that's what losing to Vanderbilt was for Billy Napier.
Yeah.
Vanderbilt was that skunk. And if you just beat Vanderbilt that year, you have a fan base that feels a lot differently about you. Last year, Arkansas comes into your place on homecoming, 2-6, just fired their offensive coordinator, beat you decidedly in Gainesville. So there are 2 games, and there's other stuff that's happened, recruiting and NIL and minutia in in-game play calling and game planning, things like that. But I think if you remove the loss to Vanderbilt in Billy Napier's first season and the loss to Arkansas in his second season, there's an entirely different perception about the program. And that just tells you how much one game can mean in seasons that Florida wasn't going to go to Atlanta either. But I definitely think each of those games put a bad spin and a bad taste in Gator fans' mouths.
I think so much of life is about circumstance and just where things go from there. I saw you in the press box. I remember talking to you before the game in the press box for that game in Nashville. And I don't remember if you remember walking. It was cold that day. And probably colder than anything Florida had played in to that point. Vanderbilt's rebuilding had been awful. Had won the week before, so there was a warning sign there. But maybe that game goes a little differently. It was a weird play or two in that game. And, I mean, it's just funny. It just seems like – and I think you just made the case for me. I would go one step further and say the rest of the schedule outside those teams definitely has not helped. And boy, wait till we talk 2024 schedule. But I do wonder how much of – and look, not that Billy Napier was powerless and all that, right? It's his job to get his team ready.
Right.
But it is kind of interesting how one thing like that continues spiraling.
Yeah, I mean, there's other things to point to. He's 0-2 against Kentucky.
Yeah.
And last year, I thought brought a game plan to Kentucky. The hardest pill for Florida fans to swallow was when I pointed out that Billy Napier wants to be Kentucky. He wants to be big on the offensive line, big on the defensive line. That Mark Stoops, hey, we're going to control what we can control. We're going to run the ball. We're going to be physical. And they were a little bit different when they had Will Levis, but that's the Stoops identity. And Billy Napier brought a game plan to try to out Kentucky last year, and Florida wasn't competitive. And that's the thing that Florida fans don't want. They don't care if you can out Kentucky. Florida's used to Steve Spurrier throwing 50 times a game. Dan Mullen was scoring. I mean, he had to score 70 to beat Samford one year, but you were excited that they scored 70. So I think starting to see, well, if that's what he thinks he wants his offense to be, are we even going to like that? And I think you're starting to see that from the fan base some too. Now you do get Graham Mertz back, and you do have going into a third year of an offense with a bunch of guys that come back. Second year for Graham Mertz, you hope that the offense can evolve and grow. But I think at the best, I think if Billy Napier is watching the national championship game last year, he would tell you that's what we want our offense to be, Michigan. And I don't know that Michigan's offense excites anyone in Florida's fan base unless you're winning the national championship like Michigan did.
And I was thinking some things along those lines when you were unwinding all that, because you think of Florida when it is just an unstoppable force. You go back to the Spurrier teams, they had speed all over the field. Mm-hmm. They spread you out. They could hit any number of a half dozen great receivers. You know, you moved to Urban Meyer, you know, they had Aaron Hernandez, they had Tim Tebow, they had Percy Harvin, they had weapons. You go back and look at that team 2 years ago, that was built around a quarterback who was tremendously athletic, but the arm was erratic, but he could run. And then those two tailbacks. And I don't know if that's, sometimes you take what you got and you make it work, because that's what you got. If Steve Spurrier had come in, you know, and had Auburn's backfield 20 years ago, I have a feeling that offense would have looked different. But it sounds to me like this is what he wants to do. And you would know better than I would. That I don't know. That might be a little tougher to sell at Florida because they're used to other things.
Mm-hmm. I remember saying it's interesting. I've had a lot of experience with this, unfortunately, but this is the fourth coach I've covered. So I'm very familiar with the honeymoon phase. And if you say anything bad about the new coach, you're being negative and you're not giving him a chance. But after about a month and watching Louisiana, I looked at the offense and I'm like, they've recruited better than everybody in the Sun Belt. They had better offenses, better players, and every week it's kind of a dogfight. And the offense is not quick to get plays in, and it's not super explosive. Now, when they had Leo Lewis at the end, he could do some things. He was really dynamic. But I remember starting to tell people, like, I don't think you're going to like this offense, even if it's successful. And Florida fans have not liked the offense. Now, I think that's exasperated because you're 11-14 through 2 years. And is it different if you had beaten Kentucky, beaten Arkansas, and beaten Vanderbilt? Maybe we're having a different conversation, but that's not the reality that we find ourselves in. Florida scored, I think, like 28 points a game last year on average. So a decent offense, nothing to sneeze at, probably middle of the road in the SEC, but that's not what Florida fans are accustomed to.
Well, they also got Graham Mertz hurt, and he I thought was fine, probably better than fine last year. I guess you get him back. What else does it look like around him this coming year?
Yeah, I said I can't remember what game it was exactly. It might have been South Carolina, but I went up to him as he was getting ready. We're at a post-game press conference, and I was like, "Man, you're tough as hell." And he looked at me and he goes, "Thanks." And like, I couldn't help myself. I was like, wish they wouldn't make you show it every week. Like, it was at some point we were like, yeah, Graham keeps getting up, but at some point he won't. He tried to channel his inner Tim Tebow there and broke a collarbone. It's interesting. I don't know that Florida got better on their offensive line. They lost both of their starting guards. They added Brandon Crenshaw Dixon from San Diego State, and I think he'll play on the other side of Austin Barber, but I don't know who plays guard. You lose Ricky Pearsall, who was your biggest weapon. So to me, I think, and Trevor Etienne will see you in Jacksonville wearing black and red, which Florida fans loved. You return Montrell Johnson, who I think is really good. Trayon Webb is going to be a sophomore from Jacksonville. You got 2 freshman running backs, but you just have Eugene Wilson and then a bunch of other unproven guys at receiver. Now, Florida did add a ton of speed. TJ Abrams and Tank Hawkins. These are 2 smaller guys, I think at 5'10", 5'11", like 160, 180 pounds, but guys who have run 10.5 and 10.3 in the 100 in high school. So real speed. So maybe you are getting back to that speed and space. But when I look at Florida, I think you've got 2 tight ends who have flashed but aren't really proven. A guy in Eugene Wilson who is super dynamic and fun to watch. But how much did Ricky Pearsall and Eugene Wilson kind of feed off each other? And last year I was using the analogy of Kadarius Toney and Kyle Pitts. Yes, both were exceptional players and exceptional playmakers, but when Kyle Pitts went out with a concussion, teams were just double teaming Kadarius Toney, and you had to find other ways to move the ball. And when Kadarius Toney sprained an ankle, and now we're doubling Kyle Pitts. Yeah. So you're going to have to find somebody because teams will just start doubling Eugene Wilson. So Florida's going to have a big spring to try to find playmakers outside of Montrell Johnson and Eugene Wilson.
Yeah, I was going to say that sounds a lot like a recipe for what happened last year.
Yeah, with a more difficult schedule.
Yeah, we'll get to that at the end. The other thing, their defense, their offense has always been the thing that stole the show.
Right.
You go back and look; they've had so much defense. Which I mean, of course they have. They're in Florida. If you're doing a halfway competent job, you're going to have dudes. But it feels like it's been a minute since they had dudes the way they had them back when it was rolling.
Yeah, I saw a clip of a game I covered in Tuscaloosa when Keanu Neal met Derrick Henry in the hole, and Derrick Henry was not the winner of that rep. And those are the kind of defenses that Florida fans, I mean, Steve Spurrier inherited an unbelievable defense when he got to Florida in 90. Will Muschamp seemingly didn't know you could recruit offensive players, but it made for great defenses. 9 safeties, 10 safeties on scholarship on a team, but some incredible defenses with Muschamp. Florida's defense hasn't been good. And Billy Napier, a lot of fans wanted Billy Napier to give up play calling, hire an offensive coordinator. Billy Napier always says to us, and if you take him at face value, which I do, that they go through an intensive self-evaluation. Every coach goes through it on their own, and then they go over it with Billy. He had never fired a coach in 6 years of being a head coach, had never fired an assistant. Wow. Within 48 hours of last season ending, he fired Corey Raymond, who Florida fans have been begging to be on staff for a decade, and Sean Spencer, who they paid a very nice paycheck to Duke just to get him on campus. Fire those 2 guys. You end up losing Jay Bateman as well. So you have 3 defensive guys. You had a strength coach change. So what that tells me is Billy Napier, after that evaluation process, identified the problem as we're not big enough and strong enough, got a new strength coach, and our defense was bad. Got new coaches all over the defense, including adding Ron Roberts. So if Florida fans think the offense is going to be different, even after they bumped up Russ Callaway to co-offensive coordinator, I would not hold my breath. It's going to be a different defense, and Florida has added a bunch of pieces. I think they're deeper on the defensive line than they have been in years. They get Grayson Pup Howard, who they finished second on in his original recruiting. He transfers in from South Carolina. And then you get a guy in the secondary, which will be very, very young outside of Jason Marshall, in Asa Turner from Washington, who had ties to Florida's new secondary coach, Will Harris. So he'll be a starter. So Florida's going to be young in some spots, but I think their defense overall is deeper than it was last year. Now, I don't know that you have a first team all SEC guy, but if you're able to rotate guys and keep guys fresh, you would hope that the defense could play better. They were one of the worst defenses in the SEC last year, so it's a low bar to step over.
I was laughing a little bit at your Muschamp comment. I don't know if you know why, but he's got a son that's going to be a quarterback in the SEC next year.
Yeah.
So it's funny how things come.
That will be interesting. That because Florida fans, I don't know that a lot of Florida fans know that Doug Nussmeier's son is going to be the quarterback at LSU.
Oh yeah,
and I don't know how they'll handle Doug Nussmeier's son beating their team. And the guys on the team probably don't remember Doug Nussmeier being the offensive coordinator, but the people in my mentions on social media and on our message boards certainly remember Doug, and will not enjoy Garrett potentially beating Florida as LSU's quarterback.
There is no stability and identity with anybody, any place anymore. I don't think. Everybody's just somewhere for 2 years and somewhere else in a couple more years.
Well, Florida had a defensive back, a cornerback, Jameer Grimsley from Tampa, stick with Alabama, and had a quote saying, Florida, they kind of run coaches off. At Alabama, Nick Saban's going to be there. Jameer Grimsley enrolled and was there for 2 weeks, and Nick Saban retired. So yeah, there was stability at one place, and that proved to run its course as well.
It's like pick up basketball teams anymore. I mean, it really is. It changes from day to day. But anyway, we could do a whole show on that. Going back to offense, the Dan Enos hire. I know he's off field, but what does that mean?
I don't know. I haven't been a big Dan Enos fan throughout his career, watching him at Arkansas twice, at Miami, but he's not calling plays. I think watching what he did and what he asked KJ Jefferson to do last year at Arkansas on the way to 2-6 tells me maybe you need to be an off-field analyst for a little bit. Yeah. So at worst, it's another mind in the building. It's another person to bounce ideas off, and a fresh set of eyes. And sometimes you might need that, just a fresh set of eyes. But I'm not really sure what he will do. I think we're also fooling ourselves if we think every school across the country, if the analysts are only, providing words of encouragement on the practice field and on the sidelines. So I will look forward to seeing what he does and what his role and involvement is when spring starts on March 7th.